forms of economic, political, and social growth, and to educate students to become citizens able to multiply what they have learned in cooperation with other countries. Okay. How did UNILAB come into being? The creation of UNILAB was issued to a Commission of Implementation in 2008. The Commission conducted studies and surveys to identify common problems in Brazil and in partner countries. So, partner countries, Brazil, now I'm talking about community of Portuguese-speaking countries, right? Which is Brazil, then Portuguese-speaking African countries, but also Timor East. In meetings and debates in Brazil and abroad, as well as in consultation with global higher education experts, the Commission planned the institutional and the academic structure, including curriculum, human resources, inventory, budget, and finances. The goal was to establish a structure that would be most conducive to the exchange of knowledge in the context of partnership, and that would enable UNILAB to adhere to national demands, and that would be relevant to the economic, political, and social development of the countries. The university was ultimately signed into law in July 2010 and started its teaching in 2011. Its campus is located in the northeast of Brazil in Retenção, Ceará. UNILAB offers undergraduate courses. I'm not sure if I've made it to students from different Portuguese-speaking countries and Brazil together, right? Offers undergraduate courses in health and nursing, energy and engineering, teacher education, agronomy and food security, and public administration. The curriculum focuses on academic content as well as on cultural and social activities. African and Brazilian students are living together in an integrated environment. Who are the students at UNILAB? There are currently 180 students, all receiving a fellowship and living on campus. International students are selected in cooperation between Brazil and the partner countries. The selection of students is intended to be merit-based and need-blind. However, activities of affirmative action are not yet in place. In 2012, UNILAB runs its first international student selection process. It's just about over. African students have to apply with the Brazilian embassies in their countries. The embassies are responsible for the inspection of the students' documents. The application is free of charge. The applications are submitted to selection committee in Brazil that consists of teachers from different disciplines at UNILAB, and the dean of UNILAB appoints the students. These informations are, since everything is rather new, these are the documents, and they've just about to finish the first round of selection of international students. But I think what's important to take away from that is you apply with the embassy, you don't have to pay for something, but and there's sort of a pre-selection, I would assume, but then it gets sent off to the university in Brazil where the final selection of students happens. And yes, it is intended to be merit-based, and claims that Brazil makes is we have public education, you don't have to pay for it. So everybody has access. However, there's no processes in place yet to assure. And so what one cannot know right now, who are those students who are coming? Like what is their background, right? What is their socioeconomic background? UNILAB provides 370 seats distributed across 7 disciplines for students from Angola, Cabo Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, São Tomé and Príncipe, and Timor East, with seats being distributed proportionally across countries. Students can assume their studies in July or September 2012. After introducing my research site, I proceed now with conceptual considerations. As indicated by the first half of the title of my presentation, whatever research question one asks, it implies an answer. Therefore, by considering theoretical concepts, I am fishing for ideological elements that can be interpreted in a variety of ways depending on the particular tradition of social theory one subscribes to. In my case, I'm ultimately interested in uncovering potentialities for development. And I do this by looking at models and ideas that have long been stigmatized due to its label of being communistic. When I started to engage in research around UNILAB, I thought that the idea of an international school where students from different countries live and learn together is unique, but I quickly had to learn that international schools represent a model of international cooperation in education that is not new, but has been realized in South-South or East-South cooperation between Russia, GDR, Cuba, and African countries before. What unites these schools is that they proclaim to educate Africans under the banner of solidarity education. By looking at 4 international schools, I will now share with you theoretical considerations regarding the idea of solidarity education as a way to conceptualize UNILAB. So, in addition to sending teachers and experts and building educational centers around the world, so the Soviet Union, Cuba, and the GDR, German Democratic Republic, received children and students from third world countries in educational institutions that were especially created for them. I'm going to speak about the Comintern University of the Toilers of the East in the early years of the Soviet Union, the Isle of Youth in Cuba, the School of Friendship in GDR, and the Patricia Lumumba People's Friendship University, also in the Soviet Union. The Comintern University was a cadre training school that existed in the 1920s and 30s in Moscow. Its main goal was the alignment of potential socialist revolutionaries from the Third World with Soviet ideology. Under the Communist International, also known as Third International from 1919 to 1943, Lenin's socialism opted to build international linkages through military interventions, technical assistance, and international education. At the same time, European colonial oppression was at its height in Africa. Therefore, the Soviet Union presented itself as a natural ally of Africans supporting their struggle against colonialism. It was at that time that Comintern University opened its door for a small group of African intellectuals that carried the promising potential to become diehard supporters of the communist cause. Although the students received genuine education, the main focus was on the study of Marxism, Leninism, and military and revolutionary agitation. The school closed in 1938 due to the shift from internationalism to nationalism understanding. The Isle of Youth, an island before the southern shore of Cuba, hosted a number of international schools from the 1970s until the 1990s. International students from developing countries from around the world, mainly Africa, came to the island to receive secondary education and vocational training. Only few of them received university education. The schools aimed at providing educational opportunities and fostering national and socialist identities among the students. Until today, Cuban universities receive students from the South to study, for example, medicine, agriculture, social communication, or sociology. Something I have not said here, which is sort of interesting that the Isle of Youth and the School of Friendship in the GDR have in common is, unlike UNILAB or the Comintern University, people were sort of like lived separate places according to their nationality. So there's this idea of, yes, socialist identity, but also national identities. Right? Okay. The School of Friendship in the GDR resulted from a request of the Mozambican government under Samora Machel. From 1982 until 1988, the School of Friendship provided the students with secondary education and vocational training and focused less on university education. The goal was to train the students in technical skills that they could use to advance their status in Mozambique, mainly through employment in the government and factories that were to be built by the GDR. Element of economic cooperation, right? Not only political. The school was a symbol of political and economic cooperation between the two countries. Originally, the school should have received at least 2 cohorts, but political changes in the GDR and Mozambique led to the shutdown of the school in the 1990s. The Patricia Lumumba People's Friendship University was founded in 1960 and continues to exist until today as People's Friendship University of Russia. The university aimed at attracting students from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, presumably to provide them with genuine higher education. The school was seen as an instrument of soft power to improve the Soviet Union's international image and to contribute to the social transformation of socialist societies by restructuring social hierarchies. So, the sentence I missed. So, however, although it was to provide higher education, of course, study of Marxism was an essential part of the education, often to the dismay of the students, sort of revealing how students are coming for something and getting something else. Some ideas are conceptual, theoretical concepts. How are these schools conceptualized in the literature? Most of the literature on solidarity education addresses the school's political relevance. The literature commonly employs theoretical frameworks that refer to the ideas of the socialist revolutionary struggle, social transformation, nation building, and public diplomacy. It is important to note that due to the secrecy of the operations and the closed archives under socialist leadership, most of the research has been conducted since the World War has ended in the early 90s. The new atmosphere often assumes that the economic and political model of capitalism was victorious. This assumption fosters an overwhelmingly critical engagement with educational phenomena under the socialist model. Instead of framing international schools as educational opportunities, they are condemned as places of ideological indoctrination that provide little real education and had little relevance for the actual lives of Africans. These schools are interpreted merely as tools to assert the leading position of the Soviet Union, Cuba, and the GDR through the building of alliances with national elites that could be mandated as wished. So this idea of you come and receive your education in the GDR and then you go back and you will have a job in a government is an example for ideas of social transformation, right? Like you invite people with lower socioeconomic status into the school, they receive education, and then they go back, they're occupying higher positions, which would cause a shift in elites within those countries. However, that was not, it was sort of successful in creating allies in countries that already had chosen a socialist path, but it hardly ever worked in terms of transforming social hierarchies. The literature depicts Africans as mere victims of these schools, considering that their gains only with a side reminiscent of a romantic past, as some of the titles suggest. Titles like Memories of Paradise, Legacies of Socialist Education in Mozambique, or The Journeys of Hope, African Diaspora in the Soviet Society. However, during colonialism as well as post-independence, Africans had a variety of options for higher education in the international arena, including socialist international schools. They also received higher education in the US and Western Europe. Some of these options were accessible only for internationally mobile elites, such as the access to prestigious universities in the US and UK, whereas international schools in the East Bloc were built for the education of lower-class individuals in particular. However, the value of such education abroad could change easily with a change in ruling elites. 2 more minutes. Okay. Exactly. So, the literature on solidarity education misses the analysis of the role of the alignment of African elites with other political and economic elites around the world. An alignment that materializes as the struggle over ideologies within those schools, not only but also in international schools. These schools were crossroads where individuals with different ideological and political interests met. They equipped their students with the skills for political engagement, exposed them to different values, provided them with the opportunities for transnational communication, and educated them in academic and vocational subjects. International schools like those under review serve as a space for the building of transnational networks that connect Africans with other educated individuals around the world. But because of that, the attempt of the schools to indoctrinate its students in one particular ideological model had to fail. African students were not interested in straight-up indoctrination. Instead, they were searching for educational opportunities, once to assert themselves, and second, to build alliances. Conclusion. To conclude, understanding current research on international schools in former East Bloc countries and trying to understand their policies and practices as much as the experience of students at these schools will help me to make sense of UNILAB. But doing so, I have to be cautious not to overlook that these schools are not merely human capital producing entities. So that's what in international higher education you get a lot these days. It's like either they're cash cows for the universities or they come and go abroad, study abroad for the sake of building human capital. But political tools for the standing and the hosting societies. Brazil's claim to do development differently, that it does not impose itself on its partners but fosters relationships that are truly mutual, solidary, and integrative. UNILAB is a project that is supposed to prove this claim. I hope that my research will be able to contribute to our understanding of Brazil's role in the world, but also I hope that UNILAB is indeed a site of possibilities, where students engage with each other openly and critically, a site that offers the opportunity for many to learn from each other, instead of learning to submerge to power dynamics that have prevented African countries like Mozambique to occupy a different discursive space, a rhetorical space in the global, a different space in the global discourse than it does today.
So I'm Scarlett. I'm from Tulane University. I'm a master's student in Latin American Studies. First, I want to say thank you to you all for planning and hosting this event because I've really enjoyed it. And I'll try to make mine, kind of brief. I don't think it's going to last 20 minutes because I know everybody's tired. So this project started last year. And I'm going in somewhat of a different direction now, but it's really set the basis for how I think about the Amazon region. And so that's why I still think it's very important. And it really, as you'll see in my conversation, it really set the basis for how I think about humans' relationship to the natural environment and human population's place in these regions that we imagine to be wilderness or pristine, and questioning the actual pristine qualities of these places. So, my primary question that I kind of set out with this project was, why were the NGOs that I came in contact with pursuing sustainable use projects instead of protected area projects, or pursuing more protected areas instead of trying to do these sustainable use projects? Because I noticed a shift in the way that rhetoric was being formed around conservation issues in the region, and specifically the emergence of conservation organizations in the Amazonian countries. And the way that they articulated their goals was very different from the model of US-based organizations that were coming in and imposing strategies. So this was the main question that I approached this with. And so this is how I'm going to kind of go through this presentation, starting with a little bit of my theoretical background, and then going into some questionnaires that I sent to staff of some non-governmental organizations that were based in Peru and Ecuador in the Andes Amazon border region. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the results and what this means and going forward with my research. So I'm going to read a little bit about the theories so I don't make it too confusing. So the recognized relationship between humans' responsibility and the protection of biodiversity of plants and animals stems from various motivations. Two common schools of thought for conservation are utilitarianism and intrinsic values. Utilitarianism refers to the value that nature has in terms of what service it provides us as humans, while the intrinsic or inherent values are those values in nature that are worth conserving whether or not they provide humans a service or function. The utilitarianism approach is also labeled anthropocentric or human-centered, while the intrinsic value approach is known as biocentric. Both theories emerged in the 1960s and 70s as new eco-philosophies, emerging as a way to better explain the value of the earth and its resources. Using the labels anthropocentric and biocentric is perhaps a more helpful way of conceptualizing these conservation approaches without delving into specific subcategories of the philosophies. And we can encompass this in in saying for human benefit versus for the benefit of all creatures because of the inherent beauty of natural resources. When thinking about one's motivation for conservation, it's important to define what we are hoping to conserve and why. Those who follow a more utilitarian or anthropocentric approach would be more interested in the benefits high biodiversity and large forests provide to humans in terms of health and future generations, while others who follow a more intrinsic value or biocentric approach would feel that conservation is important apart from human benefit and see the conservation of plants and animals as their inherent responsibility. Furthermore, the utilitarian approach might encourage sustainable practices within an industry or economic activity to protect nature instead of foregoing the activity altogether in the name of conservation. The debate between protected areas versus sustainable use shows the practical application of the intrinsic value versus utilitarianism approaches. Protected areas, by definition, disallow the use of land for other purposes, though in reality, illegal activities such as logging, poaching, and even illegal squatting can sometimes continue to be pursued. On the other hand, sustainable use is a term used to define economic activities that incorporate environmentally sustainable practices to accomplish both economic stability and environmental protection. One scholar defines environmental sustainability in this way. Environmental sustainability implies that exploited populations should not be reduced to densities where they can no longer fulfill their ecological role as pollinators, seed dispersers, or predators as part of the food chain, etc., and conversely should be harvested when their densities rise above a level where their ecological role becomes distorted. Following this definition of environmental sustainability, any economic activity or sustainable use of land would have to include practices that assure the conservation of these biological roles and processes. Justice theorists of economic or social sustainability would emphasize taking steps to assure that economic and social activities are viable for long-term future economic and social necessities. Any activity that includes environmental sustainability as one of its objectives or the main objective should approach the activity in ways that assure long-term continuance of biological roles and processes. And then a final concept, the idealized future. A widely discussed concept in psychology is that of the idealized future and the benefits or pitfalls of positive visions of the future. Some psychologists have claimed that positive thinking can foster better performance or more ideal outcomes for future events, while others have gone even further, differentiating positive expectations from positive fantasies, claiming that positive thinking is not effective if it is simply a fantasy or not a realistic goal. These concepts are interesting to consider in the framework of optimism and future expectations in the Amazon region. Though many projects carried out in the region have quite lofty aspirations, there are some very concrete strategies behind the positive expectations. So thinking about the idealized future, I thought was helpful while not a conservation philosophy. It was a way to think about and frame the mission statements and the goals of some of these NGO projects, and which can seem a little bit convoluted when you read their websites or read their material that they print. So that's why I included that. So I sent these questionnaires to staff of non-governmental organizations, some of which I had been acquainted with through previous work, and then some of which I knew were in the region but I had not been acquainted with. And I was looking at specifically the Andes-Amazon border region because it's a unique Amazonian environment because it is higher altitude and there are many endemic species in this region, you know, that are not in other parts of the Amazon, and it traditionally doesn't get as much attention as the Brazilian Amazon, scientifically and in the popular imagination as well. So, and why non-governmental organizations? Again, this region does not get as much attention as the Brazilian Amazon, and the people present there are mostly non-governmental organizations. And to me, working with a couple of these organizations in the past,
I saw that there seemed to be a shift in the way they were thinking about going about conservation, and I thought that what really appealed to me is their practical approach in my eyes, and so I kind of wanted to get behind that. So I'm just going to share a few of the results of the questionnaire. I'm not going to read all of it, but I mean, I'm happy to share more of it. It's all in my paper. But I like the quotes to speak for themselves. So these two quotes focus on what does conservation mean, and they really point to future generation and future use of resources. And the implied is future use of resources among human populations and the sustainability of human populations. And these next quotes talk a little bit about what sustainable use means to them, and they really differentiate between cultivo, or agricultural production, and naturally growing plants. So some of the projects, I'll talk a little bit about the projects that are going on among the non-governmental organizations that I spoke to were say Brazil nut management, Brazil nut tree management, or shade-grown coffee, or some native fruit trees. And so what these organizations are really trying to differentiate is intensive agriculture or extensive agriculture versus naturally growing native species in the area, which it's interesting because agriculture is very controversial in the Amazon,